So we're at the Robert H. Jackson Center, Jamestown, New York, and downstairs in the basement is a wonderful box display with a Nazi flag and a plaque dealing with a guy named Zanetta. Who is that?
That's my father. My father was a Jamestown boy, born in 1917, drafted in World War II, but somebody saw something in him. He wasn't a college boy, but it got him to go to officer candidate school. So he became an officer. He ended up being a captain in the artillery division, World War II.
And as part of World War II, he was assigned to Patton's Army, right?
He was. And something that happened in 1945 that I didn't know about for 30 years, he was among the first to go into Dachau and see these awful atrocities that Hitler had done. And he took down the Nazi flag that was flying over the prison. And that's the flag that's in the basement of the Jackson Center.
That's an amazing connect. And that was donated by the Zanetta family. Then what did your dad do for a living?
He was a salesman. He worked for Standard Brands. He sold coffee and to restaurants, hospitals, and hotels. Worked for them for 42 years. Same company.
Wow. Jason Sanborn type stuff?
Jason Sanborn was the coffee.
Yeah.
Royal Gelatin. And somebody who I just greeted, who is a docent here at the Jackson Center, said, "Are you Joe Zanetta's son? I used to own the cake shop, and I bought our coffee from your dad," which is, those things only happen in a small town. It's kind of nice.
Talk about your mother.
My mother was a stay-at-home mom until everybody was out of the house, and then she went to work. Actually, she went to work first at GMA Supermarket, and then worked at Bigelow's department store for 20 years, 25 years as a sales clerk.
And you have 3 siblings?
I do. I have an older brother, Tony, who's 75. He's the famous one in the family because he was David Bowie's manager in the 70s. Then I have 2 sisters who are both in Jamestown, Nancy and Pat.
And then there's you.
There's me.
And you were born when?
1953.
So you're a 53 guy, which made you were the class of what?
1971.
71. Yeah. And then after you went from Jamestown High School, then what happened to you?
So I had been very sick in high school. I had a kidney disease that almost killed me. And so it was very hard, but I did not go away to school right away. I went to JCC and started there, and then as my health recovered, Dr. Szabo, who was my physician, great man, said, "I think you're healthy enough." And so my grandmother bought me a car, and I drove to Ithaca, New York, and enrolled at Cornell University.
And you stayed there after
I did.
graduating?
I graduated in 75 with my bachelor's degree, and then I stayed and went to the Cornell Law School.
And then what?
So the summer after college, before law school, I had this transformative experience. As an undergraduate, and in those days when you were on scholarships, the university could impose duties on you that you didn't get paid for. So I was a tour guide, and I loved giving campus tours. And as a kid, first in his family to go to college and modest resources, here I am at Cornell University. So I give tours, and I think I was a pretty good tour guide. So much so that the summer before law school, the woman who ran the campus tour service retired, and they asked me to run it for the summer. So I had nothing in my briefcase, but I would bring my briefcase to the administration building and had a sandwich in it, had lunch, and I organized these tours. And it was a big job because lots of people would come and, potential applicants, but also famous people, rich people. And I remember the governor of New York came, Hugh Carey. I took that tour, by the way.
Yeah.
The vice president of the United States came, Nelson Rockefeller. I took that tour. And I learned that even though I came from a modest background, I moved comfortably with wealthy people, privileged people, and I never was intimidated. So then I went to law school, and I always had this tension, healthy tension, between going to law school, and in those days you didn't have cell phones. You had pink slips. You get a pink slip in your box, and I'd be asked to give a tour. So I'd go give a tour. I remember one of the tours I gave was William P. Rogers, who had been Secretary of State. And when you're former Secretary of State, you're nothing. You got no car, you got no driver, you got no security. So I had to pick William P. Rogers up in my Volkswagen at Syracuse Airport. He was a Cornell trustee. I brought him to Ithaca, and he's asking me, he says, tell me why people your generation don't like this war in Vietnam. Because this is 75, and Saigon had just fallen 2 months before. I'm thinking, he's asking me my opinion, and then I go back to the law library, and I'm looking at the Uniform Commercial Code. So that was the biggest dilemma of my life, is to continue to give tours or become a lawyer. And I chose the former.
Yeah. But you were also now dabbling in the world of politics. You've always had an interest in that.
I have. It's funny, you meet somebody and you don't think he or she remembers you. I gave a tour to Nelson Rockefeller, and then the summer of '76, his staff invited Cornell Law School to send two of us to be interns for him at the Republican National Convention, and I was invited. And I think it was partly because I had met him, and he must have, I don't know why I got invited, but I got invited. So I went to be on his team for a week and spent a little more time with him, and it was quite a remarkable experience to be an intern for the Vice President of the United States, even though he wasn't invited to run on the ticket that fall. But I always had an interest earlier than that in Jamestown, teenage Republican chairman, Charlie Magnuson. Then I became a big fan of Stan Lundeen. Just always had an interest in public policy and politics and government.
And that sort of continued on in some role or capacity. So you graduate from law school, you then now have to launch into some sort of career.
So I came back to Jamestown. I always thought I wanted to be a small-town lawyer, and I say that with great respect for what you've done and what others have done here. I came back, and it just didn't meet my expectations. And for me, the sad thing was the firm I joined, Hartley and Fessenden, blew up because Lynn Hartley was elected county family court judge. And I helped him. I guess I could say I was his campaign manager. And I enjoyed that, and signs and raising money, and he got elected, and then the firm dissolved. So I didn't really have a job. I could have stayed. We talked about me becoming his clerk. And there were a couple other people in town who I had gotten close to, Chuck Hall and the Alessi brothers. And they both made inquiries about me joining their firm. Then I was back in Ithaca, seeing the woman who became my wife, and she was getting a PhD there. And I bumped into the vice president. He said, so how do you like being the young barrister? I said, I don't know. I'm not sure it's really for me. He said, come see me for breakfast Monday morning. And he offered me a job. And I thought, am I going to give tours? I mean, I have a Cornell law degree. Come on. But he was much smarter than me, and he invited me to join his staff. And I began working for Cornell's development office, which I did for about 5 years. And he was much smarter than I was. He knew that he had all these older guys on the staff, and nobody wanted to get on airplanes and fly to Hong Kong or fly to Honolulu or Los Angeles. I was 25. So all of a sudden I'm giving tours, but not really. I'm staffing the president of the university and deans. And I had this great experience of representing a great university and calling on wealthy people and making the case. And I would brief when you're the president of a university, you don't pay any attention until you get into the meeting. And then he would turn to me and say, so what are we doing? Do you have a briefing for me? And I had a piece of paper for him. So it was a great learning experience, and I enjoyed it much more than that Uniform Commercial Code.
Well, you were then kind of launched in your whole various careers with Whittier and all others with kind of advancement, donor,
Right.
philanthropy. That was because you had a gift.
So I could have stayed with Cornell, and one of my big regrets is that I never went back to Cornell. But Cornell moved me to Los Angeles. There were a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs who'd gone to Cornell, Hewlett-Packard, Arco, Chevron. And once you're living in Los Angeles, it's hard to go back to, for me, it was hard to think about going back to Ithaca, New York. So I affiliated with the University of Southern California. I became, depending on what day of the week, maybe number 3 guy in their development office. I spent 8 years there, had a great run, and then I was invited to become vice president at Whittier College in 1993, which was Richard Nixon's alma mater.
Nixon, yeah.
And it's interesting how things come around. So I had gone to Nixon's inauguration in 1973 as the teenage Republican chairman from Chautauqua County, I guess, and was a fan of Nixon's. So he went to Whittier College. After Watergate, the Whittier faculty voted to rescind his degree, which you can't do. You can't take away a degree. He wasn't convicted of anything. He said, I'd like to come visit with some students and faculty. This is in 1975, after he resigned. And they said, come at 7 o'clock in the morning, because nobody would show up. He came. Of course, nobody showed up. So that was the extent of his relationship with Whittier College. I get there as vice president. It's 1993, and his office called and said, we have a table, and we'd like to know if Whittier College would like to buy a table to come to this dinner with Richard Nixon. I said, I don't know how I got the call. I said, yes. And it was $10,000, which the college didn't want to pay for it. So I reached out to a wealthy Republican donor, and she said, you know what? This is the first time anybody from Whittier College has asked me to do something for Richard Nixon. I'll buy 2 tables. So I sent students and faculty, and it was at the Biltmore Hotel. I have a picture of me with Richard Nixon taken that night. And these are the things that happen that you don't realize the impact you have. One of the young men who came to that dinner is now a California state senator. He's running for Congress. And I pinged him a note recently, and he said, you know, I got inspired to public service meeting Richard Nixon. And I helped arrange that by getting the person. I'm always in the background. You know, I got the person to buy the table, but then we invited Tony Strickland to come to the table.
Yeah.
So it was great. I went to Nixon's funeral, and there's Bill Clinton, and there's George Bush, and Ronald Reagan. And I'm thinking, how am I at Richard Nixon's funeral? But I was. And I say it's always we, it's a team, but somebody has to have that piece of paper that you hand to the president, or someone has to buy the ticket so you can go to the table, right? So that was my job. So I stayed at Whittier 8 years, and again had a great run as vice president. And then I decided I needed to enhance my balance sheet. And healthcare is new to philanthropy. Up until the 70s, hospitals didn't have to raise money because they just had unlimited resources, but managed care came in. So I was asked to head up a new foundation supporting a bunch of hospitals. And I did that for almost 20 years.
During that time period, you also enhanced your resume by becoming a board member of the Robert H. Jackson Center. As you're growing up in Jamestown, New York, did that mean anything to you?
So yes. So growing up in Jamestown, New York, I had 3 I call hometown heroes. One was Robert H. Jackson. To think that a man could grow up in Frewsburg and Jamestown and become one of the most prominent jurists in the country, in the world. Robert H. Jackson, Ralph Erickson. Ralph Erickson also went to Frewsburg High School. He went to Cornell undergrad and then Harvard Law School. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I looked up Ralph Erickson, and he became a mentor to me. And the only connection was Jamestown and Cornell, of course, and then Stan Lundeen. And so later, when I was invited to join the Jackson Center, it was such a connection of those hometown heroes. Robert H. Jackson, maybe I could use my skills as an advancement professional to help the financial background of the center. Stan Lundeen, still young and active and chairman of the board, and Ralph Erickson, who I tried to get here. His brother-in-law is Bill Cass. So those are my 3 hometown heroes, and they all kind of interconnected at the Jackson Center. And Charlie Goodell. I should have mentioned him also.
And you've connected on so many fronts and so many things, and it's a whole interview unto itself.